That door, Karen, did you come in? Yes. Unless Larry's coming, you can leave. Oh, there he is. I didn't even see you. Look. All right, I'm going to try and get through Nehemiah. I said try. I want to read you the quote. The best quote isn't going to come from me, all right? General William Booth, who founded the Salvation Army, said this. He said, I want you young men always to bear in mind that it is the nature of a fire to go out. The nature of the fire is to go out. You must keep it stirred and fed and the ashes removed. Think about what that means in our spiritual life. It's the nature of a fire to go out. We've known that. We've seen that in our own lives, right? Have you ever, I know you have, but you've been in places like maybe on a Sunday morning the Lord speaks in you at the altar and He's stirred you, He's given you a passion. You might pray things like, I'll never, or I'm in, or we pray these prayers, right? And there's a fire lit within us, and it's genuine and it's real, and you're not even telling the tale when you say it. But by Tuesday, something's cool, right? And a month from then, you forget you've even prayed what you prayed. So it's the nature of spiritual things to go out. You have to keep it stirred. How do we keep it stirred? You give, you serve, you pray, you do all of these things to kind of, prayer is a big part of it, right? You keep that fire, you keep that closeness with God. And what you'll find in this, and it's crazy how God, what I taught this morning comes back again tonight, and I didn't even know it until I put both sermons together, and then they're right here. It's God doing the same thing. You'll see it in a minute. But sometimes you look at the history of Israel and you see that the fire goes out, right? They're up, they're down, they're up, they're down. And sometimes I think there's a differentiation between people who just say stuff to say stuff and people who genuinely mean something at the time and then the fire goes out. Does that make sense? Yeah. So Israel keeps praying. In Nehemiah chapter 12, in verse 27 and on, and I really want to concentrate on 13, but they do all of this worship. I'm just going to read it. But you'll get the sense that they're going to dedicate the walls, right? They're going to have this spiritual moment. They're going to have this amazing time. So Nehemiah 12:27. The dedication of the new wall of Jerusalem, the Levites throughout the land were asked to come to Jerusalem to assist in ceremonies. They were to take part in the joyous occasion. Look at what they had. They had songs of thanksgiving. They had the music of cymbals, harps, and lyres. The singers were brought together from the region around Jerusalem and from the villages of the whatever they are. All right. They came from Beth Gilgal and the rural areas near Jabbar and that place. And the singers had built their own settlements around Jerusalem. The priests and Levites first purified themselves. They purified the people, the gates, and the wall. Verse 31. This sounds good, right? It sounds fantastic. It sounds like this worship service. They're dedicating the walls. If you were to look at this moment, you think Israel is holy and it's all good. Verse 31. I led the leaders of Judah to the top of the wall, and listen to this. They organized 2 large choirs to give thanks. Man, they're getting with it. They're getting Baptist-costal. They don't just have one choir, they've got 2. Right? They've got choirs. One of the choirs proceeded southward along the top of the wall to the dung gate. Hoshaziah and half the leaders of Judah followed them, along with Azariah, Ezra, Meshullam, Judah, Benjamin, Shemaiah, and Jeremiah. And then some priests who played trumpets, including Zechariah, son of Jonathan, son of Shemaiah, son of Mattaniah, son of Zakur, a descendant of Asaph. And Zechariah's colleagues were Shemaiah, Azarel. I wish they gave them proper names. All of these people, they used the musical instruments prescribed by David, the man of God. Ezra, the scribe, led this procession. Amazing moment. Cool, right? They've got these choirs. Ezra's leading it. There's this procession. Man, you're coming to the end of the book and you think all is well, right? They've made these things and they're singing. But you can have worship services that don't actually really tell the whole story, right? Look at what happens. Verse 38. Where was I? Verse 37. At the fountain gate, they went straight up the steps on the ascent of the city wall toward the city of David. They passed the house of David and proceeded to the water gate on the east. The second choir, giving thanks, went northward around the other way to meet them. So one choir is going one way, the other choir, and they're going to meet. I followed them together with the other half of the people along the top of the wall, past the tower of the ovens to the broad wall. Remember, God has done this in 51 days or whatever. God has built these walls. They didn't have walls. It was a disgrace. They've been down for all of this time. And it says, we passed the Ephraim gate to the old city gate, past the fish gate and the tower of Hanel, and unto the tower of the 100. We continued on to the sheep gate and stopped at the guard gate. The fact that they even have gates is a miracle, because that's what Nehemiah has done. Nehemiah has helped build the city, helped build the walls, helped build the walls and the gates. The two choirs that were giving thanks proceeded to the temple of God, and they took their places. This is an amazing moment. So did I, together with a group of leaders who were with me. We went together with the trumpet playing priests, those guys. Verse 42, and the singers, those guys, right? And they played and they sang loudly under the direction of that guy, right? So you've got the priests, you've got the choir, they're singing. Listen to this, 43. Many sacrifices were offered on that joyous day, for God had given the people cause for great joy. They were celebrating God. The walls had been built. Nehemiah has come for 50 odd days, and God's done miracles. The women and children also participated in the celebration, and the joy of the people of Jerusalem could be heard what? That sounds like a good day, right? Healthy place. Look at what it says. On that day, men were appointed to be in charge of the storerooms for the offerings, the first part of the harvest and the tithe. Remember, God had the storerooms so that the Levites could be fed, and because they didn't have everyone else had these. God had attributed land and stuff to them. The Levites didn't have that. They were God's, and God took care of them. And for the worship offerings and for the Levites, these storerooms, he says the first part of the harvest and the tithes, they were responsible to collect from the fields outside the towns the portions required by the law for the priests and the Levites. God had provided for the priests and the Levites. He told them, I'm going to pay you, and I'm going to pay you by taking these kind of like taxes, and I'm going to make people bring stuff to the storehouse, and out of the storehouse, guess what? You get fed. They performed the service of their God and the service of purification as commanded by David and his son Solomon, and so did the singers, and so did the gatekeepers. The custom of having choir directors to lead the choirs in hymns of praise and thanksgiving to God began long ago in the days of David and Asaph. So now in the days of Zerubbabel and of Nehemiah, remember it all started with Zerubbabel, all Israel brought a daily supply of food for the singers, the gatekeepers, and the Levites. That's how they survived. That's how it was to be. The Levites in turn gave a portion of what they received to the priests, the descendants of Aaron. The people would come, the Levites, that tribe would feed off of that. The priests came from the tribe of Levi, so the Levites would then give to the priests, and God has fed everybody. All of his servants, all of his... And then in Nehemiah chapter 13, it's like you turn a whole different page. Something starts to happen. They're worshiping, they're doing this thing, and then they start reading the word of God. Now, remember in Nehemiah chapter 10? Thank you. In Nehemiah chapter 10, do you remember what we read, the vow of the people? If you read Nehemiah chapter 10, they prayed all of this stuff. Look at verse 35, for instance. We promise to bring the first part of every harvest, whether it be a crop from the soil or from our fruit trees. We agreed to give God our oldest sons and the firstborn of our herds. They prayed and they prayed and they prayed, and they said, God, we're in. And by inference, they knew they weren't in, and they've been against the law of God. And they come in Nehemiah chapter 10, and they're like, we're in, God. We're going to pray. We're going to do these things. This is what I'm telling you. I don't know what everyone else would teach you, but I'm not sure in Nehemiah 10 that they were lying. They prayed these things, but by the time you get to Nehemiah 13, it's like, what happened? And I would be scathing on them hadn't I dealt with that myself. In other words, you ever found yourself sincerely? I remember times in my life where I prayed, Lord, I'll never do that again. And guess what? When I prayed that, I didn't pray it thinking, I'm going to do it again. I genuinely thought, Lord, I need forgiveness. I need your help. I won't do that again. And it was like the Lord could have told me, that's interesting, because 2 weeks next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, you're going to do the same thing. And so I don't know if they're praying and just going through some spiritual weird notion or motions, And then some of them were praying and genuinely got a vibe from, and wanted to follow the Lord, and then they mess it up. But we're all like that, right? What I'm saying is, they've had a party. They're at the walls, they're celebrating. But all isn't all what it seems to be sometimes, right? And I just know in my own life, there are times where you have to be careful what you promise to God, right? In fact, the Bible teaches it's better not to make a promise than it is to make a promise and then... That's why God's so good. He makes promises and he's kept every one of them. None of us can say that. What I'm saying is, not everyone that makes a promise and fails on it was just a deadbeat that didn't care. Some people do. Some people will say anything just to be part of the crowd, right? Some people will say, oh, we're in, when you're not in at all. You can decipher for yourself where they're at, but something happens on that same day. So everything's good, right? Everything seems to be fine. Chapter 13, verse 1. That's the quickest I've ever gone through that many verses, so you just witnessed a miracle. Ice cream awaits. All right, we're going. On that same day, as the book of Moses, so they're reading the law, they're reading the Pentateuch, they're reading the early books of the Bible, was being read to the people, a passage was found. They turned to this passage, and it says that no Ammonite or Moabite should ever be permitted to enter the assembly of God. There's a lot of history between the Ammonites and the Moabites. You can read it in Deuteronomy 23. And they wouldn't give food and water in the wilderness when God's people were coming out. And you read about them hiring Balaam. And it's all a mess. The Ammonites and the Moabites were all a mess. And God was coming against them. And it says, look, they read this out loud. But here they are. You know what really, really changes things is when you start reading and preaching and teaching the word of God. Because this is the sword. This is what the Spirit uses to really change us. You think it's coincidence that they happen to be reading this passage? God hasn't. The Bible says that you're not allowed to hang out with the Ammonites or the Moabites. Well, that's fine and dandy until you read in the scripture and you can guess who's around you. How uncomfortable. I mean, if that was a rule today, thou shalt have no Ammonites or Moabites around you, and there's a whole row of Ammonites and Moabites, that gets awkward. I mean, that gets awkward for me. That gets awkward for you. Right? But the point is, see, subtly things have come in, probably in the name of grace. I'll just let them, right? But God is put a punishment on these people. Look at what it says. They're not permitted to come in the assembly, for they had not provided the Israelites with food and water in the wilderness. Part of their crime was they could have helped God's people, and they what? See, this is a side of God that we don't understand. Is he gracious? Yes. But man, he remembers things. And if you want, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to feed my people. God didn't need the Ammonites and the Moabites to feed his people. But when you come against God, guess what? There's a consequence. And until you repent and turn, there's going to be a cost. God didn't just let the Ammonites be. That's fine, no problem. You read the story about Balaam. They were hiring, and God spoke through Balaam's donkey, right? Which goes back to your text message. Look, it said they had not provided the Israelites. Instead, they hired Balaam to curse them. They hired Balaam to curse God's people. Though God turned the curse into a blessing. That's what God does. You read the story. I read it this week again. I certainly don't have time to go into it. But read the story of Balaam and his donkey. And it's a crazy passage. That's a hard one to preach in some ways. They hired someone to curse God, and God just turned it around. And he even uses a donkey to speak. It's funny how people think they're going to come and beat God When a donkey knows more than you do, you've really got... When your donkey is teaching you spiritual truths, when you're worse than your donkey spiritually, it's time to...
Nice check.
Yeah. When God would come and say the godliest person in your house is your donkey, that's a problem, right? Look at what it says. Verse 3, when this passage of the law was read, all those of foreign descent were immediately what? That's kind of awkward, right? But they did it. Everyone had to go. Why? That's what the Bible said. That's what God had said. Was that them being rude or no? Go ahead.
Was that Ruth and Naomi from Moabite?
Yeah.
Moab?
Yeah. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't spring on me halfway through a good sentence, Rich. No, just kidding.
From one donkey to another.
Yeah. Touche, yes. Now you've really messed me up. All right. So they exclude them. Why? Because that's what, and clearly, but what I'm getting at, but see, they've just been worshipping, right? They've been going through all these notions, and yet in the middle is already a violation. Like you've got these people, and now they read it. And when they read it to their credit, at least they did something about it, right? Look at verse 4. Before this had happened, Eliashib the priest, who had been appointed as supervisor of the storerooms of the temple of our God. Listen, before all this took place, something has been going on. And this is crazy. Do you remember who Tobiah was? Do you remember? Look at Nehemiah chapter 1 a minute. Just so you remember.
That he one of the bad guys that were...
Yeah, he was, yes. Look at verse 10. Not verse 10, that's chapter 2. Hold on.
But you'll never.
Go to chapter 2, verse 10, that's right. But when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite official heard of my arrival, they were what? They were very displeased that someone had come to help the people of Israel. So Tobiah is against...
Ammonite.
Yeah, Tobiah, the Ammonite official, yes. He's an Ammonite, so he shouldn't have even been there, right? But they've let him in, and he was displeased that someone had come to help the people of Israel. If you want to know Tobiah's heart, it's right there. Why are you unhappy? Well, someone's come to help Israel. That'd be like someone at Lawrence Drive saying, why are you unhappy? Well, people are helping church. Okay? I mean, look at verse 17. Not 17, 19. They're the troublemakers. Remember, they scoffed and they contemptuously said, what are you doing? Are you rebelling against the king? And Nehemiah responds to them, you have no legal right or share or historic claim in Jerusalem. And this is what's crazy. That Tobiah has got his way in. And because of family things and marriage, he's got himself in. We'll see this. But look at what it says. In verse 4, there's storerooms. I told you the storerooms were to feed them, right? The storerooms were for the offerings. And look, as a supervisor of the storerooms of the temple of our God, and who was also a relative of Tobiah, had converted a large storage room and placed it at what? This is what the devil does. This guy who's related to Tobiah through marriage, through family lines, had converted a large storage room and placed it at Tobiah's disposal. You're telling me that you took God's storage room and gave it to Tobiah. That's how nuts is that? You see how, if you don't think that's crazy, you're crazy. Right? Think about what they said. Tobiah is an enemy of who? Yeah. Tobiah has no heart for Israel. And yet, this is how the devil gets in. Tobiah, now, it's bad enough. Look, when you get storerooms, when God says make a storeroom, you know what you have to do with the storeroom? Everything he told you. Yeah, store. Well, there you go. In a room. Storeroom. Thank you, Larry. Yeah. Now man, I get messed up all over the place. I got ice cream on my mind. All right. God has said, and not only do they not do what they should be doing, they've let old boy in. They've let Tobiah in. Tobiah who's against them. Tobiah who wants to cause trouble. Look at what it says. He was a relative of Tobiah. He converted a large storage room and placed it at Tobiah's disposal. The devil's weaved all this in. And the people are crazy enough to let Tobiah do it. And this is a church vote. Tobiah needs to get a no from everybody. Like at what business meeting did they say, hey, let's give our stuff to Tobiah? And everyone was like, all in favor? Aye. Are you nuts? I mean, are you nuts? Yeah, that would be like someone, the worst critic of Lawrence Drive, who's lost as a goose, who's not saved, coming in and saying, hey, can I take over? Look, Look at what it says. The room had previously, the room had previously been used for storing the grain offerings, the frankincense, various articles for the temple, and tithes of grain, new wine, and olive oil, which were prescribed for the Levites, the singers, and the gatekeepers, as well as the offerings for the priest. God had prescribed this, the offerings for the priest, the articles for the temple, the tithes, the Levites, the singers, the gate, everything God had said they were doing. They were doing. But somewhere along, see, that's what I mean. They were doing God's will, right? They opened the storehouse and they were following God. How do you get from there to giving it to Tobiah? It's what we said at the start. That fire just stops to what? And Tobiah doesn't come in on day one. Tobiah gets in after weeks and months and years of what? Once you step away from the word of God, there's no telling where you'll go. It's just a storeroom. No, it's obedience. Tobiah, I just can't. Here's what I think happens today. So many people would sit there and know that Tobiah is a bad idea, but they don't want to say anything. So Tobiah gets through. I'm not saying be a jerk. I don't want a contentious business meeting. I don't like no votes as much as you. Right, if we're trying to do something. But there's a time to stand up and be candid. There's a time to say, no, this is crazy. And look, if they still vote to do it, then that's not on you. You've done your part. How in the world does Tobiah, and Tobiah, because of marriage, he's got this inroad. It's wild that he hates Israel, and yet he'll take over their storerooms pretty quick, won't he? It's absolutely nuts, this is. Absolutely crazy. Verse 6. Nehemiah had built the walls, and so he went back. He went back to King Artaxerxes. He went back to, he says of Babylon, because they'd overtaken it by then. I was not in Jerusalem at that time, for I had returned to King Artaxerxes of Babylon in the 32nd year of his reign. He spent 12 years there. He spent 12 years serving God, being the governor, doing all these things. And then he says, but later I asked permission to return. I'm not sure how long he went back for. He spends 12 years. Remember, he's asked the king, can I go? He spent 12 years in Jerusalem. He's gone back to King Artaxerxes. He's gone back to be with the king. Remember, he was the cupbearer, right? He's gone back. And now he's had to what? See, when he goes back, he's assuming what? Yeah, all is good. The walls are up. I've done my job. Now I can what? You ever left the job thinking it was over and then get a call like, okay, it's not over. Look at what it says. I had returned to the king Artaxerxes of Babylon in the 32nd year, though I later asked his permission to return. When I arrived back in Jerusalem, I learned about Elishab's evil deed. He calls it an evil deed, providing Tobiah with a room in the courtyards of the temple of God. Nehemiah comes back and he's like, I can't believe what I'm hearing. And he calls it out. He says, this is an evil deed. I cannot believe that Eliashib has been allowed to provide Tobiah with a room in the courtyards of the temple of God. What would you guys say if I said, let's rent out our rooms to atheists? That'd be a good idea. Right after, at 10:30 we're going to do it, and at 12:30 we're going to allow the atheists to come in and preach a great message to you. Surely somebody would be like, I thought you were crazy before you done lost it.
There's a huge question mark over you right now.
That'd be a problem, right? And if everyone was like, great idea,
I'd be like, you're going to let him in at 12:30? We won't be done.
All right, man. Oh, man. Touche. It's a good job I don't have feelings, isn't it? I like that. I'll give you that one. I'm sweating, not crying, so don't worry about it. All right. Look at what it says. Oh, man. Verse 8. Nehemiah is such an amazing person. He doesn't even need people with him. He's used people. He's an amazing leader. I've thought about Nehemiah a lot, and man, he makes you not feel like a great leader yourself. Nehemiah, look at what he says. I became very upset and threw all of Tobiah's belongings out the room. You see what's crazy is lots of people would look at Nehemiah and say, you're a lunatic. More people have been mad at Nehemiah than the Eliashib. Nehemiah's come in and like, we ain't doing this. And he throws all the stuff out. Remember Jesus in the temple and the tables? Same kind of thing, right? And people want to say, oh, he became upset. He threw all of Tobiah's belongings out the room. He's not scared of Tobiah. He's not scared about what the people think. He's been away. He's come back and he's like, I cannot believe you guys have bought this. Then in verse 9, I demanded. I don't think that was a nice little small request, do you? I demanded that the rooms be purified. And I brought back the articles for God's temple. You see, they've got rid of them. They put them somewhere else. He goes back to get the God's temple's articles, the grain offerings and the frankincense. Verse 10. Here we go. Remember, all look well, right? Remember what they've prayed. Remember what they've promised. But all is not well. Look at chapter... and by the way, again, one movement away from God's word leads to what? Yeah, leads to another, and you can take a little step. And then you take another little step. Have you ever, let's be honest, have you ever looked back in your spiritual journey and said, Lord, how in the world did I get here? Mm-hmm. It started as a wrong thought. It started as a bitterness, as a hurt. Sin will take you way further than you want to go. People don't make massive leaps from one spot to like this normally. It's normally what? You can category. You can look at your life. You can see this movement. And it wasn't just one issue. It wasn't just the Ammonites and the Moabites. Look at what it says. Nehemiah said, I discovered that the Levites had not been given their prescribed portions of food. He'd come back and they had prayed and they had said, we'll give the priests food. And guess what they're doing? They're not doing that. God has set up this system. And God's over it and he's sovereign and he doesn't have really any, competition. But how many people does it take to wreck a system? Why were the priests to be fed? Because again, the others had land. The others could feed themselves. The priests had to trust who? Now, let's get one thing clear. If the people don't feed the priests, God's going to take care of them. Right? They're not to the point of like, well, if you don't give me food, I'm out. I mean, that's how the system, remember the early church? Sell stuff, bring it, we'll use it, whoever needs it gets it. Right? How long, that system wouldn't take very long before Barnabas came, he sold his stuff. What happens if everyone holds on to their stuff? System's down. Right? Every system has its ways of breaking up. They hadn't given their prescribed portions. Let's see, verse 10. I discovered that the Levites had not been given their prescribed portions of food, so they and the singers who were to conduct the worship services all returned to work their fields. Do you catch what's happening? They had to provide, right? Look at what it says. They hadn't got their portions of food. I don't think they did the right thing here, but this is what they did. So they and the singers were part of the worship. They were to be paid for. They were to be taken care of. This is how, when you bring your tithes and the offerings and that, we feed these people. And look at what it says. They return to work their fields. Why is that such a problem? Why is that such a big deal?
Did you get nobody leading the music? No worship going on.
They basically gave up their ministry and had to go and do what? Practical things to what?
To eat.
Yeah. So what's happened? Now the people that God had in place to sing and to lead is what?
Then elected.
I mean, it would be like saying, well, we're no longer paying anybody to, right? Well, if I don't get paid, either God's going to have to do something or I'm going to have to do something. You guys can stop paying me, but you can't stop paying me, expect me. I mean, something's got to give, right? And God has set this whole system up. And it says, they all returned to work their fields. Verse 11. I immediately confronted the leaders and demanded, why has the temple of God been what? What was their prayer in 10? In fact, go to the end of Nehemiah 10. I hope it's the end now. Yes. What is the very last sentence of chapter 10 that they prayed? Someone read it.
We promised together not to neglect the temple of our God.
Read that one more time.
We promised together not to neglect the temple of our God.
Kind of weird, huh?
Mm-hmm.
We promised together not to neglect the temple of our God. Woo! 3 chapters later, where we at?
Neglected.
That's what I'm saying. Did they mean that when they prayed it?
No.
Well, I don't know.
Well, it may.
That's what I'm saying. I'm not going to be. Go ahead. Did you have something? Oh, I thought you were going to say something, Hannah. They may. I don't know that they're praying and they're deliberately like, we're just going to mess this whole system up. I would, if gun to head, I would venture to say I think they meant it and then got. What would you say, Phil?
I think they meant it.
I do too.
Distracted, because I mean, you said it just takes one to allow the devil to come in and ruin something.
Compromise.
I've seen it in my own life.
Yeah.
I've promised something. Let's be honest. You ever done that in your marriage? It's getting thick now.
No comment.
Once you get so far, yeah. If you've got your wife in the room, I'm sorry. Look, you make promises. You make promises to. I make promises to Tasha, and I meant them. And then I figure out, this promise is way harder to keep than I thought. And then I'm trying to back out. Did I really say? All right.
No, you just forget what you said.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, we have. Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, that's what you heard, Tosh. Like, no, I mean we struggle, right? But God makes these promises, and their own people have said. And so He says to them, "What happened?" Let me ask you this: if we pray things meaning it, and then our actions go against it, what has happened? What would you say in your life happens from I prayed this on an altar, or I said to God, I'll read my Bible every day?
Compromise.
Sin.
The devil jumps in.
What do you mean by compromise?
We'll do that tomorrow.
That's part of it. 100%. 100%, that's part of it. We'll do it tomorrow. We'll mess with the temple tomorrow. We'll feed them tomorrow.
Laziness. Yeah.
Part of it's laziness. Sin just comes in. The devil gets in. But think in your own life. It's not confessional. It's all right. But why is that? Sometimes, maybe you can get. Listen, I'll be honest with you. You can get caught up in emotionalism. I remember how they may have done it different in America, but when Britain needed people for war, they took them to these rallies. They fed them. They did all of these British songs and pumped them up. And 5 minutes later, 20-year-old men were signing up for war. And how did they do it? They pumped this emotionalism into them. And all of a sudden they were like, sign this, and you're done. You have to go, well, what happened? Well, I got caught up in the moment. Well, it's too late now. You're done signed. And at church, you have to watch that. You can get caught up in emotionalism. Worship's hard because of that, right? You can get caught up in the moment and say, woo! People have said they got saved because of that, and they really didn't. They just, I felt something. Well, it's more than just feeling something, right? But we've all got caught up in that moment, right? I don't know how crazy your craziest prayer's ever been, but I'll give everything. No, okay, I take that back. Everything might be, yeah. But somehow this happens, right? And as much as I want to lambast these people, I see it in my life. I see it in other people's life. This is a daily struggle, right? Be careful what you say. Be careful what you promise. And they had prayed, hey, we'll take care of the temple. Yeah, well, you didn't. Look, then I called all the Levites back again and restored them to their proper duties. In other words, you know what he said? Forget all of that. Come back. We're going to trust God. You ain't going to work. God's got a system. We're going to take, because the whole system, remember, it's only the Levites that can be there. It's only the Levites that can do certain jobs. In fact, you were dead. You can't, it's only the Levites who can do this stuff. So without no Levites, guess what? It's kind of like a church with 0 teachers. Well, somebody's got to teach. Well, there ain't no teachers. Well, there's no Levites, the whole system's down. So Nehemiah doesn't ask for permission, and he doesn't say, how are we going to do this financially? He just tells them, get back. Get back. And again, whether they should have gone or not, that's a whole nother. But verse 12. Once more, all the people of Judah began bringing their tithes of grain. Once more. Now they started to what? They started to give it. You know what's amazing about that? Not that they started to do it again, but that God had allowed them to still have it. Remember Haggai? You're in a mess because you're not doing what I told you. The miracle of this isn't just that they started giving again when they got a bit convicted.
They had it.
It's the fact that they had it. You see, it's not as big a miracle to start giving as it is that you had something to give if you've lived in years of disobedience. I mean, if you haven't given properly to the Lord in 40 years, yes, it's a miracle that you start to give. Yes, it's good that you start to give. But you should count yourself very fortunate that you had anything to give. Because 40 years of disobedience, God could have just said, you know what? And God can take whatever he wants to take. We had someone in Odessa that lost money. They never lose money. They lost $100. And from that, they said, I haven't been given to church. I know that God, she took from that God was, and she started giving. Because she's like, you know what? That would, basically God was teaching her in that moment, I can take it, or you can give it. And she was so kind of taught by that $100, she started giving. So, and notice it's not going to Nehemiah. It's going to the storerooms. Look at verse 13. I love this. I think Philip's talked about this. This is the kind of people you want. This is the kind of people we need. Look at what it says. I assigned supervisors for the storerooms. Shelemiah the priest, Zadok the scribe, and Pedaiah one of the Levites. And they appointed Hanan son of Zakur and grandson of Mattaniah as their assistant. Who did they take? Who did they take? Look at what it says. These men had an excellent reputation, and it was their job to make what? Honest distributions to their fellow Levites. God had said, I want you to distribute what needs to be distributed, but do it what? Look, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to understand that if you put the wrong person in the storeroom, that's why you sell to Tobiah, and that's why grain goes missing. Oh, sorry, I'm out. How you out? Hey, oh, there's no wine again. Right?
That'd be like putting you in charge of that.
Yes, right. Yes. Of the cake? Yes, that's probably not advisable either. But look at what it says. Look at what it says. They had a what? They had an excellent reputation. Nehemiah knows that these are men of what? And at some point you've got to trust it, right? They had an excellent reputation, and he needed them to make. Nehemiah cannot stand there every day with binoculars like, what did you do? How many? He can't. And so he hires people based on what?
Their integrity.
Yes. Not on who they're married into and Tobiah. And no. We need honest, good people. That's how it started in the word. That's why servants, deacons, men of great integrity, filled with the Holy Spirit. That was Stephen. That's always been God's plan. Look at what it says in 14. This is Nehemiah. Remember this good deed, oh my God. And don't forget that I have faithfully done for the temple of my God and its services. This is kind of funny. He prays to God and he's like, hey God, will you just what? Will you just remember that I'm doing this? We talked about this morning. Paul knew that God would judge him fairly and that the prize awaited him. To Nehemiah, Nehemiah knows it's difficult. He knows he's going to pay a price, but he's like, God, would you just assure me again? And not that he's doubting that, but God, don't forget all that I have faithfully done for the temple of my God. It's kind of a weird prayer to pray. But he prays it. God, will you just see? Will you just show me that you're on board with this? And by the way, some things you don't need to pray if you're on board with. If you're following God's rules, then he's on board. You don't have to have a meeting. Should we do this? If it's what he said, then just do it. Look at verse 15. And we might make this. In those days I saw men of Judah treading out their... Okay, remember what they prayed? Part of their prayer intent was to do with the Sabbath. What were they going to do? Honor the Sabbath. Why? Because it was an act of worship. It was an act also physically. The land, the animals, the people, they needed rest. You know what God's prescription was? Work hard for 6 days. But for 24 hours, take off. And worship me and put me first. Back in generations, they used to close every shop, right?
Yes.
You had to do everything on a Saturday to get ready for Sunday. It's the same way. They had to get ready for Sabbath. Because when Sabbath came, nobody was buying, nobody was selling. Remember what they prayed in 10? God has come and said, what about Sabbath? And they've all said what? Oh, we'll do Sabbath. And they did for a minute. But again, think about what happened. This is really interesting, and I don't know, I wasn't here obviously, but in America, how did we get from, and Britain, wherever, how did we get from this reverence and respect on Sundays where we wouldn't sell alcohol and we wouldn't open shops to where we are now? My limited guess is this, that somebody saw an opportunity to make cash.
Of course.
And they started to make cash. And when they started to make cash, other people were like,
But it eroded over time.
it's not, correct. It's not
Very
a,
short period of time, by the way.
It was?
It was. It was very short.
there you go. And it was because, there it is. I know we say to keep the Sabbath holy, but look at how much old boy's making.
Yeah.
Now, if they open their store and they don't make money, it's not big, I'm not going to do that.
Right.
But when they perceive, it normally comes back to money, right?
Mm-hmm.
Money, sex, it's all kind of the same stuff over and over. And so, look at what it says. In those days, I saw men of Judah treading out their winepress. That's fine, but not when.
I don't.
And here they are. And by the way, Nehemiah's watching it. They're not even what? They're not even hiding it. And have you noticed that that's what's happened in our generation? That, listen, let's be honest, in 1950, were people sinful? Yeah. Did people do some rotten things? Yeah. In 1950, was everyone sexually pure? No. No. I wasn't there, but.
Yeah.
Leadership.
But what's the difference between 1950 and now? We're not even
It's
trying to
open.
hide it.
It's open now.
Well, it's open, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what was looked at as that shouldn't be done is now.
Okay.
I've heard. I wasn't here again, but they say that even when you got like a child out of wedlock, they hid that.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, they did.
Now it's like,
Oh, yeah.
You got so.
Hey, look what I did.
yeah, we've almost gone the absolute other way. And look, Sodom and Gomorrah wasn't a great place. So listen, let's not be naive. Sexual stuff has always happened. Always. But yeah, it's how it's perceived, it's how it's accepted. Now it's you're weird if you think that's weird, right? That's normal. Who are you to but they're treading out the winepress on the Sabbath. Why? Something's gone awry. They're chasing money, they don't care. Something's happened. Look at what it says. They were bringing in grain, loading it on donkeys, and bringing their wine, grape, figs, and all sorts of produce to Jerusalem to sell on the Sabbath. What were they not allowed to do? They weren't allowed to work on the Sabbath, and they weren't allowed to what?
Sale.
And here's the truth that they don't understand. God will give you more in 6 days than you'll do in 7.
That's Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, well, there you go.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem like a bad business model, does it? This is the thing. Like, I will gain more. Spiritually, I will be blessed better by obeying God than, right? But somebody somewhere is like, no, we have to what? So now they're treading it out, and it says they loaded it on their donkeys, they brought their wine, their grapes, their figs, and all sorts of produce to Jerusalem to sell on the Sabbath. It's all gone, the pride, everything. Look at what it says. So I rebuked them for selling their produce on that day. You know they love Nehemiah, right? That's why he's praying, God, remember me, because he's public enemy number 1, right? Some men from Tyre who lived in Jerusalem were bringing in fish and all kinds of merchandise. They were selling it on the Sabbath to the people of Judah and in Jerusalem at that, in God's city. It's happening today. Look at what churches have become. Right? Verse 17. So I confronted the nobles of Judah. You see, when Nehemiah goes back, nobody's confronting him, but he comes back and he starts what? I confronted the nobles of Judah. Why are you profaning the Sabbath in this? What does he say again? Evil way. He keeps saying you're doing evil things. Part of what we find difficult in this culture is saying, hey, Nick, you're messing up in an evil way. We would at least mollycoddle that a bit and be like, hey, Nick, hey, bud, you messed up a little. How many people can say that and accept that? If I look Nick in the eye today and say, that's an evil way, Most people can't say that to somebody, and most people certainly can't receive that.
Right.
Even if it's true. Now look, I'm not telling you, Pastor told us just to call out everyone in their evil way. That's not what I'm saying. And you better be sure you're right before you start down that road. But I'm telling you, if someone comes to you and said that's evil, you're not going to be like, glory, hallelujah, are you? It's hard to say and it's hard to receive, but somebody had to what? Well, it should always be, but there's definitely a stage where you're like, look, enough's enough. And you don't, again, have to vote on that. Nehemiah knows the rule. You don't have to pray, dear Lord, if they're selling on the Sabbath and it's wrong, please let me know. You don't have to pray that. You don't have to have a business meeting. You don't have to have a board with you saying, listen to me. If you're meeting to discuss whether that's right or wrong, you're already lost.
Yeah.
I heard in Britain of churches that are meeting to decide what to do about homosexuality and stuff, right? If you're meeting to discuss that, you're done already lost. I mean, if we're sitting up here at Lawrence Drive saying, is homosexuality okay or not? If we're even having that meeting, we already done lost. I don't have to have that meeting. I don't have to have a meeting about should we be selling on the Sabbath. First of all, if nothing else, you made a promise. Even if it wasn't law, you made a promise. Right? Even if God said, I'd rather you not do it on the Sabbath. The moment you say, I won't do it on the Sabbath, guess what? You're held to that anyway. Verse 17, I confronted the nobles of Judah. Why are you profaning the Sabbath in this evil way? Wasn't it just that sort of thing that your ancestors did that caused our God to bring all this trouble upon us in our city? Guys, do you remember why we were even there? This is the kind of stuff we already paid for. What are we doing? Why are we going backwards? Now you're bringing even more wrath. Listen to this. And again, this is uncomfortable for us. We don't believe this, I don't think. Look at what it says. You are bringing even more wrath upon Israel by permitting the Sabbath to be desecrated in this way. So when you desecrate the Sabbath, will God respond? And what does it say? Wrath.
Yep.
Oh, God won't do anything. And because he doesn't strike us dead in the moment, we think, what?
Where?
Again, we've talked about this. You know, when you mess with electricity, it tells you pretty quick, don't it? I mean, it's not like 5 days later. As soon as you get it, you get it. God's not like that. You can sin and perceivably what? Get away with it. But 10 years later, there it is. There it is. And he says, you guys are bringing wrath. You're desecrating us. And again, it's worse when you read chapter 10 before this and they're praying. And look, so Nehemiah doesn't just fuss at them. He comes up with this plan. It's pretty cool. I commanded that the gates of Jerusalem should be shut at darkness bell every Friday evening, not to be opened until the Sabbath ended. He said, I'll stop this. And so what does he do? The night before Sabbath, he just closes the gates, and guess what? You can't get in. But look what happens. Look what happens. I sent some of my own servants to guard the gates. He trusts them. They can't be paid off, so that no merchandise could be brought in on the Sabbath day. The merchants and tradesmen with a variety of wares camped outside Jerusalem what? So here's what they did. When he first did this rule and he shut down the gates, what did they do? They just hung out at the gates. So if you're going to stop us from selling inside, we'll just sell what?
Outside.
Mm-hmm. Stop us if you can. But look at what he says. They only did it what? Mm-hmm. Once or twice. Verse 21. I spoke sharply to them and I said, what are you doing out here camping around the wall? Catch the irony of that. God has just glorified himself and given to his people this wall. What do they do in return? They camp around it, defaming the Sabbath. Shouldn't that wall be a memorial stone? Shouldn't you look at the wall and say, how do you look at the wall and then defile the Sabbath? Do you see what I'm getting at? I mean, the wall is a testimony to who? To God. God's just done this. In 50-odd days, he's just done this. And that's like God giving us a building, us celebrating, and then defiling it with sin inside the building. I mean, you've got to be some kind of... Look at what he says. If you do this, what you're doing out here, camping around the wall, if you do this again, he's had this power. And he's been a governor, and what does he say? I'll what? I'll arrest you. And guess what? That was the last time they came on the Sabbath. They knew he wasn't lying. They knew he could do it. He said, I'm going to arrest you. Next time you do this, I'm going to arrest you. I commanded the Levites to purify themselves and to guard the gates in order to preserve the holiness of the Sabbath. Again, who's going to do the gates if the Levites are out trying to make a living elsewhere? He prays again. Remember this good deed also, O my God. Have compassion on me according to your great and unfailing love. Isn't it amazing that in a rough spot, in a time of adversity, in a time where not many people are standing with him, in a time of spiritual turmoil and spiritual welfare, look at what he asked for. What does he ask for? He doesn't ask for more people. He doesn't ask for more stuff. He doesn't ask for cash. What does he ask for? God, in this moment, I'm really needing your what? Your great and unfailing love, your compassion. God, without your great and unfailing love, I'm done. If I don't understand and embrace and accept your great and unfailing love, I can't make it. He's not saying, hey, you owe me money. Give me enough money and there's not enough money in the world to make this worthwhile if money's your thing. He's probably hated by a lot of people, right? Because he stood for the truth. That's what we're afraid of somewhat, right? If we stand for the truth, we're going to lose people. He deals with that and he says, have compassion on me. God, I need your grace. I need your mercy. I need you. I need to know. And it's kind of funny if you're doing the curriculum this morning. It's exactly what Joseph has. It says, but God was faithful to him and he loved him. In the midst of the prison, in the midst of what he was going through, God didn't give him all this stuff. He gave him love and compassion. Verse 23, about that same time I realized that some of the men of Judah had married women. Oh my goodness. We've been through this. Ezra's been through this. Stop marrying the wrong people. Right? It's clear. No one could say, oh, I didn't know. Oh. This one's a bit easier to understand why they did it. It's lust and different things, right? I mean, I can understand that a bit easier. Ashdod, Ammon, and Moab. Here we go. Furthermore, half their children. Here's the other problem. Their kids don't even speak Hebrew. They don't even know Hebrew. They're speaking the language of the Ammonites and the Moabites. Imagine God's people, God's children, not even knowing Hebrew. Look at what it says. Furthermore, half their children spoke the language of Ashdod or of some other people and could not speak the language of Judah at all. They had got that. See, here's the problem. When you mess it up, it transfers to who? To think that you can sin and go against God and not affect your children or grandchildren is just ignorant. It will affect your grandchildren. It will affect your children. Well, all I did was sell fish on the Sabbath. Yeah. But you know what that led to? Your grandkid doesn't even understand Hebrew anymore. Because it was one step to defile the Sabbath, and then it's the next to marry whoever you want. And if you'll sell on the Sabbath, you'll marry a foreigner. You see how this all... I confronted them and called... Listen to this. You might think he's mentally unhealthy or what, but listen to what he says. This is what you said at the start, right? I confronted them and I called down curses on them. I should have tried that on the pastor search team. What do you do? I like to call down curses on people in my spare time. Would that have been good, Janelle? Listen to how he deals with it. Listen, you make up your mind if this is right or not, or spirit inspired, but look at what it says. Look at what he says. I beat some of them and pulled out their hair. I mean, that's what it says. Oh, that means what it means. He beat them and pulled out their hair. Now again, let's do an interesting poll. You ready? Who think that was the godly thing to do, the right thing to do? See, I'm on that. I think it was. All of you guys are just... All right. Listen, I can tell you Tasha's going to wince at that. That's the difference between me and Tasha. If you're in a bind, she's your grace and mercy person. I asked Landry today, I said, if you mess up, who do you want to mess up in front of? Mama. Yeah. Because she's a lot.
You got it.
Yeah. Okay, you can go home. That's your study homework, even though the class is over. Go and figure out if you're allowed to beat people, curse them, and pull their hair out. Right.
Out of love.
In love, obviously in love, Nick. Yeah,
In love.
yeah, in
But
love.
didn't God say, vengeance is mine, I will repay, thus saith the Lord?
He has said that, yeah.
He said to forgive.
Interesting question, ain't it? Listen to what he said. I made them swear in the name of God that they would not let their children intermarry with the pagan people of the land. He makes them swear to God that they won't let their children intermarry. Why? If nothing else, they don't even understand Hebrew now. Where are we going with it? See, sin has this intended thing, but you don't understand where... Maybe if they knew Hebrew was no going to be their grandchildren's language, maybe they would have stopped, but you don't know where sin's going to take you, do you? And look at what he says. Wasn't this exactly what led King Solomon of Israel into sin? There was no king from any nation who could compare to him, and God loved him, and he made him king over all Israel. But even he was what? Led into sin by foreign wives. Solomon's the smart one, right? Solomon's the wise one. And Solomon, look at what it says. God loved him. No one could compare to him. God made him king over all Israel. And yet he was led by who? By the flesh, by the enemy, into sin by foreign wives. And all of a sudden he's got concubine. You see, once you're willing to have one concubine, guess how many? Didn't he have like 3? How many did he have? Was it 700? I think David had. All right, 700 is a bit much, isn't it?
Yeah.
700. I mean,
I would say.
anyway, that 700. You know how that starts? Honestly, do you know how that starts? That starts with concubine number what? And somehow getting over the guilt and the whatever and the fear of the Lord, and 1 becomes 2 and 2 becomes 3, and by the time you can see your conscience, by the time you're 80 in, it's just what? Who cares now?
Yeah.
And I'm getting away with it, I thought, but he isn't. And by the way, if Solomon's the smartest one, that doesn't, and he's doing that, that makes us all feel good men, right? And look, here's what we've got to ask ourselves, and we're almost done. Here's what we've got to ask ourselves. This is really interesting to ask yourself. Let's be honest, we've had some pretty rough moments in our life, and what I mean by that is we've done some, let's just be honest, none of us want to say what our worst crime is.
Let's don't talk about it.
Imagine if just for 10 minutes the Lord would let you read everyone's mind in here.
Ooh, that'd be bad.
Mm-hmm. How many of us would still be friends? What is she wearing that for? I never did like them. All right. I do not want to know you. Right, I don't. And you, I don't. Yeah, exactly. Why do you keep thinking ice cream in the middle of this? Yeah. How could you eat? Listen to this. How could you even think? How could you even think of committing a sinful deed and acting unfaithfully toward God? Nehemiah comes back and he's like, how? It's not that even you did it. I mean, that's part of it. But how could you even walk? How could you even think? Okay, so the things that you regret doing, ask yourself that. How did you even think about doing that? How did you even think? How did you even get that far? Part of it is garbage in, garbage out. Watch what you watch, what you talk about, watch what you obsess over. Yeah. One of the sons of Joadiah, son of Eliashib, the high priest, had married a daughter of Sanballat the Horonite. Here it is. He married Sanballat the Horonite. Remember Sanballat? So the son of the high priest had married into Sanballat. That's Tobiah and Sanballat, right? So by marriage, I said it was Tobiah, but it's Sanballat, the Horonite. I banished him from my presence. Didn't we talk about that this morning? See how listen, when God says the same thing on a Sunday morning and Sunday night, either I'm a genius or God is saying something. Take your pick. You should go with option B. I banished him from my presence. Why? Oh, that's mean. No. Look. This is holiness. Remember them. Listen to this. He's been praying, remember me. Now what does he say? Remember them, oh my God, for they have defiled the priesthood and the solemn vows of the priests and the Levites. This is kind of funny. So he gives it over to God. Now he gives it over to God after he's beaten them and pulled the hair. So that might be like it. You hate me? No, I gave you over. Well, that's after I beat you. Right? Well, whatever. And listen to what he does. Now, again, who's helping Nehemiah? Well, God is, but who else? Who do you see helping Nehemiah? Nobody. Now, they may have been, but it's not said. And finally, look at the last two verses. Man, I purged out everything foreign. You know what everything means? Everything that shouldn't be there, I purged it. Why? Why? Here's why. Because if you allow the foreign stuff to stay in the camp, what in the world's going to happen? You know, when you hear recovering alcoholics say, well, I still have some, you know, just that get out.
Compromise leads to great disaster.
There it is. I mean, if you're an alcoholic recovering, don't have it in your house. Don't have it in your house. Oh, I want to be stronger. Well, I mean, I'm not being funny. I found that even with food, that if you don't have it in the house and you get an urge for it, guess what? Now you can drive and go get it. But I eat way less Snickers if I don't have them in my house. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if I have an urge for one, going to Kroger seems like a whole lot of hassle. I'll just do without. If I've got 10 on my table,
You remove the temptation.
there you go. Why would you have it? Yeah. All right, we're almost there. And I assigned tasks to the priests and the Levites, making certain that each knew what. He didn't just assign them and leave them. He said, this is your work, go do it. I also made sure that the supply of wood for the altar and the first portions of the harvest were brought at the proper times. They didn't even supply the proper wood for the altar. Here they are worshiping, they're doing all that. They can't even worship because they don't have wood for the altar. And so you know what? Remember they prayed. Well, remember what they prayed in 10? We'll take turns and we'll bring the wood. And guess what? They didn't. And you know how that starts? If you're on a rotation and the person in front of you doesn't do it, you know what you're going to say?
Well, they didn't do it, so why do I gotta do it?
There you go.
I'm not doing theirs.
There you go. Well, we are very Baptist together, aren't we? Look, I made sure that the supply of wood for the altar and the first portions of the harvest were brought at the proper times. You had to bring your first portions, you had to do it at the proper time. They prayed that and then they didn't do it. Remember this in my favor, oh my God. And there's the Old Testament history. There's a history of God's people. It doesn't exactly go out the way you want it to, does it? That's an absolute miracle that you just witnessed.
Yay!
Yeah, there you go. We made it.
You did it, Bill.
Yeah, we did it together. Do you feel proud, Phil? All right. Does anyone before I know you've got ice cream, and so no one really cares anymore, but do we have any questions, thoughts before we go?